Racism doesn't always come in obvious ways. It isn't always outrageous acts of prejudice or hateful speech. Most often it comes in the form of systemic racism. Defining systemic racism isn't easy given the way it affects so many parts of our life. So it is easier if we start where we all take our first steps into society, the school system. Schools are microcosms of society. That means that they reflect many ways in which society functions when it comes to implicit or explicit bias. One example is the way in which disciplinary actions are handled when it comes to BIPOC students versus white students. For example, the U.S. Department of Education found that Black students account for 18% of the preschool population, but account for 42% of suspensions, and another 48% of those students go on to be suspended more than once. These trends of disparity when it comes to disciplinary actions continue to exist at every level of education. A key part in understanding the disparities that exist in education is understanding exclusionary zoning. Exclusionary zoning is a policy that sets land use requirements on things such as apartment buildings and minimum lot sizes. This policy also prevents certain citizens from living in certain neighborhoods to keep the property value of homes in those neighborhoods high. Public schools get a lot of their fundings from property taxes. So think of it like this. Bigger houses equal higher property taxes, which equal better schools. This means that schools located in wealthier neighborhoods have an overflow of resources while those in low-income neighborhoods are starving for resources. While exclusionary zoning is not dictated by race, there's a distinct overlap when it comes to communities of color and poverty. This can be attributed to the systematic failure to address previous and existing injustices that are in the economic world that only aggravate the issue. All the things I've mentioned so far contribute to the achievement gap. The achievement gap consists of test scores, retention rates, and graduation rates. When students don't have access to equal resources or are unfairly singled out due to explicit or implicit bias, their performance undoubtedly suffers. It puts them under a microscope of pressure that most students cannot handle. One situation that I witnessed firsthand was in my high school theater class. We were all getting ready for rehearsal, trying to get everything together. Well, the teacher came in and said that we weren't getting ready for a rehearsal appropriately. She began to lecture us, and during the lecture, she unfairly singled out my friend. She said, "What do you think it looks like for a Black man to be sitting on a couch with two white girls?" An argument ensued that left my friend embarrassed and disheartened. He was so angry that he began to cry. Whether that was her intention or not, it doesn't matter. The damage is done.
Once a student of color makes it out of a biased educational system, they're then thrown into the economic world where these same disparities still exist in housing, healthcare, and equal pay. These disparities stem from policies that are rooted in bigotry and used to increase superiority over BIPOC families. Redlining is an example of this, which was facilitated by the government to lessen the amount of money poured into predominantly Black and brown areas. Although there were a couple acts put in place to combat this, they were barely enforced, and essentially redlining has just evolved into new forms. Having the ability to buy a house could really help an individual build up their own personal wealth. But being that redlining has existed and new exclusionary zoning laws exist today, it's really hard to bridge that gap that is the racial wealth gap that we know today. Think of it as trying to dig yourself up out of a hole. If you have a broken shovel, there's only so much you can do in comparison to those who have a working shovel and climbing tools. Many BIPOC individuals have to jump through hoops in order to achieve the same great things that their white counterparts are able to do.
One thing that's been on the minds of millions across the nation this past summer is the protest against police brutality and the unwanted martyrs, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. One thing this past summer has done is that it shed light on the shadows in the criminal justice system in this country. And although these shadows aren't new, they've been getting worse and worse over decades. We only make up 4% of the world's total population. However, when it comes to the total prison population, America makes up 22%. Now that's a very alarming number. This information becomes worse when you learn that the imprisonment rate of Black males is 5.8 times that of white males, or that Hispanic citizens are imprisoned at a rate that is 1.4 times the rate of white citizens. It is important to note that African Americans only make up 13.4% of the total population, and Hispanic citizens only make up 18.4%. I can keep telling you guys statistics about our country, but instead I like to shift to more of a personal story. My brother, who is an alumni of UNC Chapel Hill, was on a track scholarship. Every year he'd drive home or just drive about the area to go where he needed to do, he would always get pulled over constantly. When he'd get pulled over, it wouldn't even be, do you know how fast you're driving? But it was, where are you from? Is this your car? What do you have in your car? Can I search it? My brother was racially profiled all the time in a place where he was supposed to be protected. It got so bad to the point where he had to carry his athletic bag in the passenger just so the cop could see that he had the bag and ask him if he was a student, let alone an athlete, and give him grace. And ever since he did that, every cop noticed that he was an athlete. It's hard to believe that my brother, with character and stature, could be profiled on any day, and it has me wondering sometimes, am I next?
As you can see, the issue is systemic. Racism is America's worst pandemic. That is not a joke nor a gimmick. The system is a biased machine running off the oil of the ignorant. Thinking that good character and intelligence is derived from someone's pigment? It's like a tumor that is malignant. Rooted deep within, it is far from benign. There is poison in the vines, snaking throughout our history built on bondage and binds. America is bleeding. And that is a deeper issue than George Floyd not breathing. But we have to find a way to limit this or else oppression will be limitless. There needs to be some clarity to understand the everyday disparities. Our founding fathers said that we were born equal, but this has to be the parity. Over 244 years later, and we are still lacking solidarity? No true resolution. America is great, but it's not perfect, and we need to get rid of that illusion. Because I have a righteous indignation against this system of discrimination. And I will not give in or fall into assimilation, because in our hands lies the future of our nation. And if all lives matter, then you should be pissed. America, why is equality the one thing that we have always missed?